few years ago, I worked the night shift at a local hotel. It wasn't super fancy, but it wasn't a seedy motel or anything either. And it was in a decent area of town. It was geared for extended stay guests, who were mostly there for work. There weren't a lot of late arrivals, so it was a pretty nice gig. I got paid just to kick it in the back room and browse Reddit until the sun came up, which is what I was doing with most of my nights anyway. After midnight, we locked the front doors. If someone sounded the buzzer, we could open the doors manually to let them in. One night I was there alone. At about 1 a.m, a young woman ran up and began pounding on the doors. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, "Please, help me. Open the doors. Please, don't let them get me." Stuff like that. So I opened the doors for her and grabbed the phone and punched in 911. She sprinted in, and I just watched the doors close behind her, agonizingly slow, positive that her attackers would slip in before the automatic doors closed and locked again. But no one came. She kept babbling, telling me to call the police. "Call the police, please. You can't let them get me." She was flipping over chairs, trying to hide. She kept saying them, which freaked me out more than anything. I was already calling the police, of course, and I told her as much. But it didn't seem to calm her down. I informed the police of the situation, and they immediately asked me if she had gotten out of a specific taxi. I didn't know if she had or had not, so they said they were sending some officers over. After I got off the phone, she was a little calmer, but she kept looking around frantically. I tried to assure her that everything would be fine, but it didn't seem like she heard a word I said. She started to wander off down the hall, so I followed her. She went into our large conference room, where she was backing herself up into a corner, now staring directly at me with increasing terror. I kept telling her everything was all right, and I did not approach her. I just wanted to keep her in my sight, but I had no desire to get close to her. I tried asking her what happened, but she would not respond. She kept telling me that I had to help her, and that she was afraid they would get her. I told her it was okay, and that I had called the police. She looked horrified after that, and asked me why I'd called the cops on her. I explained I had called the cops for her, not on her, and the police would be here to help keep her safe. To which she responded, "Don't touch me." I was roughly 50 feet away from her, and had not moved at all. It was about then my fear started to ease up, because I realized there probably wasn't a them after all, and this girl was simply having some sort of mental break, probably drug-related. The cops arrived shortly after, and rather than being relieved, she was scared of them and was reluctant to speak. They sat in a chair in the lobby and tried to ask her her name, but she just drew her knees up to her chest and started hyperventilating. Then she got up and speed-walked down the hall. Cops ended up escorting her out of the building. She wasn't struggling or screaming, but she definitely seemed distraught and confused. When it was all said and done, I reviewed the security footage from outside the hotel, and it looked like she had been in a cab that was on the road next to the hotel. Then she bailed out of it when it slowed down for a stoplight, and she came running immediately to our front door, screaming. At no point was she pursued by anything, or anyone. From what the police told me, the cab driver called the cops before I did, since she had skipped out on the fare. I never knew what happened to her after that, but I didn't see her in the arrest reports, so I don't think they charged her with anything. I hope they were able to get her somewhere safe. I don't do nights anymore, but for years in my early 20s, I did nights at a residential care facility. This place looked almost like an old mansion from the early 1900s. One of the spookiest sections was a sole-charge dementia facility. 15 D3 residents, and no one but me to keep an eye on them all. Around 3 a.m. one morning after doing rounds, I hear a doorbell ring. I get a sudden wave of goosebumps, because this is a secure facility, and it's the middle of the night. I go look out the window. There's no one there. I blew it off as being a hallucination. 10 minutes later, it rings again. I'm defecating myself. I go back to the window and check again. No one was there, but I looked across the street and a strange car was parked. I take a photo of it just in case, and then go back to my station where I've been playing a game of Match the Card Suits with a delightful but very demented lady. I sit down and she looks at me and says, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" He looked like he had a bad night and needed a cuppa. Chills went down my spine. but I brush it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. The doorbell rings again, less than 5 minutes later, and this time I'm freaking out. Another one of my residents is walking up the hallway painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I pass him on the way to the front window, and he turns to me and says, "Don't answer the door alone. He might hurt you," before carrying on his painting. Whatever was left in my bowels is now out. I'm trying not to cry. I don't know what to do. I'm a single 23-year-old guy who weighs $150, in charge of 15 patients with varying stages of dementia. And the doorbell keeps ringing in the middle of the night. And it's a weekend, so my on-call won't answer the phone. She never does on weekends. I look out the window and see the same car as before, and as I'm looking around, I see a shadow move to the door, and a person walks around the corner, and then looks straight in the window at me. We make eye contact and I scream. My residents start freaking out. I'm freaking out. The guy just bolts. I call the police. They turn up, and it's chaos. I have 15 residents who have all been woken up by the commotion, and now have 2 police officers in their space. My on-call isn't answering her phone, and I'm struggling to deal with the whole situation. Eventually, after many cups of tea and Milo, and lots of PRN meds for the more challenging residents, we're mostly settled. It's now 7 a.m., and the handover shift arrives for a nurse and a caregiver. I tell them what happened, and they tell me that there was a woman down the street whose house was broken into, and she was attacked in her bed by a guy who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I have an internal meltdown, because we have drugs in the cupboard in the medroom. Good drugs, too. Morphine, methadone, fentanyl, etc. I can't help but wonder if he was intentionally looking for us and just took the next best option. I left the job not long after that, because they refused to hire a second person to work nights, despite being understaffed according to best practice guidelines. At 18, I was taken out of high school and put into an alternative school for attempting suicide. The alternative school was for troubled kids who couldn't be in public school to get their GED. One stipulation to stay in school was you had to have a job. I only had a few weeks until graduation and wanted to graduate with my class, even though I couldn't walk with them. So I took a job that was offered to me, working full-time at a sex store. My guidance counselor and alternative school teacher fought for me against the school board to count it. And since they had stood up for me, I really wanted to make the job work, despite being so young and despite all the red flags of the job. I stuck it out. That job was honestly a blast, but completely scary sometimes too. The worst story, though, is when I was closing up shop around 12 midnight, much earlier than usual, but no one would care. I was a huge comic book fan, and that night the Avengers was premiering in theaters, and I rushed to meet my friends. Everything was shut down, and I went to lock the door. As I did, a car pulled up front. Not surprising. I had closed early. I waited for the guy to walk up and was about to open the door to talk to him, but something told me to keep the door shut. Instead, I locked the door quickly. He reached for the handle, and I gestured to the close sign and said, "I'm sorry, we're closed." He tried again, and I gestured to the completely dark store like, "Bruh, we're closed." He muttered something about needing condoms. Now, my store was really cheap, and the condoms we sold weren't worth anything. I routinely told customers who just wanted condoms the attached 24/7 gas station had better name brand condoms and sold them for less. So that's what I told this guy. He ignored me and tried it again. This time he was much more forceful. I backed away and was like, "You need to leave." He ignored me still and started hitting the glass. He was yelling at me and trying to use brute force to get inside. I ran back for cover into the shadows of the store and hid behind a rack of clothes. I could see the entire glass panel storefront shake with each slam of his fist. I had no faith that the whole thing wouldn't shatter and he would come in and kill me. I feared for my life next to a gimp suit. The only other exit was too close to where the guy was at. If I left that way, he would hear me. I also didn't drive and got rides to and from work by my mom, But there was a panic button up at the register. We technically had to wear a panic button during shifts too, but I had put it away already. I had to army crawl from the clothing area to the porn section and wrapped around the register, all while terrified anytime I heard a noise and anytime it was quiet, because I was sure several times he had gotten in. I finally made it to the button. I smashed it, and nothing happened. Yeah, that thing didn't work. I grabbed the phone and a bat that another employee had left as a weapon and tried to intimidate the guy. "I'm gonna call the cops," I lied. My dumb teen brain didn't want to call the cops and risk missing the movie. He saw me, but didn't leave. We just stared at each other. Then, like the cavalry, my mom pulled up. She saw the guy and thought he was a sane dude just checking if we were open, and got out to talk to him. She was super chill, like, "Oh yeah, they're closed now, but they open at 8. The dude must have weighed his options, because he wordlessly got into his car and sped off. I bolted out of there and tried to see where he went, but he was long gone. I walk over to my mom, and she's holding a Marvel hoodie I owned, like, "I washed this for you, so you could go to the movie in costume," unaware that I nearly died. A week later, that gas station was robbed at gunpoint, but who knows if it was related.